Okay, now let's talk about something called function scoping. When we talk about scoping, we're actually talking about what we might call the availability of a name. And what do we mean by a name being available? Well, the very simplest example of that is the fact that anytime we assign a value to a name, like var equals 100, we should then be able to later refer to that variable and that name afterwards. So in this case, we're assigning 100 to var, and we're now printing var times 2, 200. Great. So the name var is available to us once it's been assigned. It should be pretty obvious what we're going to see, or at least that we'll see a problem, if we try to use var before it's assigned. That's what we're trying to do here, and this is a type of error that may come up from time to time. If you attempt to do this, you're going to see that you'll get a name error, what we call a name error exception. And the name error exception says var is not defined. You see, it even refers to it as a name. The name var is going to be assigned to the value 100, so it'll be bound to an integer, and we can say that the name var is assigned an integer. But unfortunately, we made the mistake of trying to refer to var before we assigned it. So we call that a name error exception, meaning that the name's just not available yet. Okay, the same thing now is going to be true as we look at functions, but we're going to look now at how functions scope their variables. In this code, as you can see, we've created a function called do. Do assigns a variable inside the function, which is something that we've seen before, and it works just as you might expect. When we call do on line 8, execution jumps to line 4. We assign an integer to x on line 5. We print that integer on line 6, and then where do we go after line 6? Straight back to line 9. Now, the big problem here is that when we try to run this code, although we do see 5, and you see that we see 5, we did print x on line 6. That got us the 5. Even though that's the case, when we come back to line 9 and we try to print x, we see that name x is not defined. What does that mean? It means that x is not available to us on line 9. Now this may seem strange since we did call do, we did assign 5 to x, and we were able to print x. So that worked perfectly. But when we got outside the function, x no longer became available. Or I should say, x became no longer available. What this means is that when we leave the function, all local variables are basically destroyed, or we could say removed. When we leave the function, all local variables are removed. Now, what's a local variable? Well, x is a local variable. And this is what makes a local variable. A variable that was defined or assigned inside the function. So x is local to the function. What this means is that when we call the function, it's going to go about its business and it may assign some variables. If it assigns any variables inside the function, that makes them local. That means that they're local to the function and that when we return from the function, those variables are gone. They're removed. They're put up for garbage collection. They're unlinked from the name. The name no longer means anything to Python. This is why we end up getting a name error. Name x is not defined. Strangely, since we had assigned it and we had used it. So this is the point to understand about function scoping. If your variable is defined inside the function, it's local and only available during the execution of the function. But what about var? What is var? Var is a different kind of variable because var was defined outside the function. And so when we say that var is global, which is what we're saying here, we're saying that var was assigned outside any function. Now the name global is what it may seem to be. That is that it is available everywhere. That means that once we assign it inside our program, it's going to be available everywhere inside our function, our program, including inside functions. So if I call do and I print var here, we're going to find that var gets printed. We're still getting our error because we're trying to print x, and we should probably stop doing that. But you can see that we're able to print var both inside the function and outside the function. That is, var is available everywhere. This is why it's called global. Another term that we use sometimes for global variables is file scope. That means that the scope of the variable is the file itself. So we're able to call do, we're able to print var, we're able to create local variables if we wish and print them. But once we get outside the function, the only variables that are available to us are globals that have been assigned. And this is the meaning of function scoping and the scoping of variables in general. Python will limit the existence of a variable defined inside the function to that function. I'll write it out because that was a complicated sentence. Python will limit the availability of a variable defined inside a function to that function.